So here we go. That's the cue. So we are recording this evening session, and we will make the link available to everyone who has registered for this, and it will later be made available on our YouTube channel. So this evening, if you have questions for our speaker, I'd ask that you please post them in the Q&A. So use the Q&A option. We may be posting links and references in the chat, but if you use the Q&A, that helps us better keep track of which questions we have answered and what answers we need to follow, or what questions we need to follow up on. If we don't get to your question tonight, or if you have a question about something unrelated to this evening's program, please feel free to email us at info@anjac.org. That email account is highly monitored, and the staff member who is best able to answer your question will return your email. I guarantee you will get a better response rate by emailing info@anjac.org than if you email jcoffee@anjac.org. Because there's more people looking at that info@anjac.org account than look at my email. Just me looking at my email. So I know many of you know ANJAC well, and you know our mission. We've got many of our members who have registered for this program tonight. And just as a refresher, ANJAC's mission is really to help municipalities make good decisions about the environment for healthy communities. And we do that primarily by working with environmental commissions. We also support green teams, open space committees. We work with elected officials to make sure that we are creating a more equitable and healthy New Jersey and protecting and restoring our natural resources. We do that in a number of ways. So we see ANJAC as really a resource organization for you, for environmental commissions. We work with about 300 municipalities across the state of New Jersey. We're down to 564 municipalities in total, and we work with about 300 of them. So our resource center has lots of models and handbooks and resources. We do one-on-one brainstorming and strategic planning for issues that you're having in your municipality. Of course, we've got webinars and roundtables that are happening all year long, and we've got our quarterly ANJAC report, which is online. And if you're a member, you can go check out our website, what membership means. ANJAC report gets mailed to you, to your home or to your municipality. We've got two core programs, or signature programs, as I call them, the Fundamentals for Effective Environmental Commissions. So we finished that for the year. All the videos are on YouTube. That's the, oh my gosh, I'm on my EC. What the heck does that mean? And what do I have to do? And so it gives you all the basics of what the law says, how your EC, could function best, as well as, oh my goodness, I'm not an engineer. How do I review a site plan application? So we go through all of that. Our other signature program is in the fall, and so save the date for September 27th, our Environmental Congress, and we're very excited. We're going to be changing the venue location, and we'll announce that soon. ANJAC is also your advocate, your voice in Trenton, not only with the DEP, but with the legislature and the governor's office. So we do our very best to be active in Trenton for you, carrying forward what we hear are the biggest challenges for our environmental commissions. We also celebrate your wins there and let them know how effective environmental commissioners can be. And so it is you, our members, our individual members, our corporate members, our definitely our EC members and foundation support that makes ANJAC go and enables us to bring programs like this and our ANJAC report to you all year long. So if you're not sure if you're a member, you can email us at info@anjac.org. And if you want to learn more about membership, you can use this QR code. So get out your smartphone, take a picture of it, or just go to anjac.org and look for membership. This year, we're working a lot on clean water, climate change, renewable energy. And so you have seen and you will continue to see lots of programming from us about these subjects. Whoops, went a little too fast. And just as a side note, I was in Trenton twice today at the legislature, or twice this week at the legislature talking about plastic pollution. So there's a whole lot more to come on that as well. We know ECs were the real leader and foundation behind the strides that we have made. And just as a quick note, last month, the World Economic Forum cited New Jersey's plastic bans as the most effective in the United States. So that is huge kudos to you EC members who have done enormous work in reducing pollution in our waterways, on our land, And we celebrate you and we thank you for that. So follow us on social media. We're most active on Facebook and Instagram. We are all over YouTube on our channel with more than 100 programs. So anything that you need to know as an EC member is likely on YouTube. And if it's not there, you can't find us, just send us an email. And we want to thank you for all the work that you do in your communities for the environment, for public health. We are here for you, and we're excited that you're here tonight to learn more about wind energy. So with that, I will stop sharing, and I want to turn it over to one of your fellow EC members. So Dr. Josh Kohut is an EC member in Cranberry Township. So we thank him. He knows what it means to be working at the local level, really the hyper local level, and trying to influence good decisions about the environment with elected officials and for the community. And he is also co-director of Are You Cool, the Center for Ocean and the Center for Ocean Observing Leadership. So he also knows what it's like to run an internationally respected lab who is on the cutting edge of making sure that we are protecting arguably our planet's most valuable and important resource, our ocean. I had heard someone say once that the ocean, and I did fact check this, the ocean produces about half of the world's oxygen. And so you can thank every other breath you take to the ocean. And so I thank you, Dr. Josh Kohut, for coming here tonight. Really appreciate your time. I know your schedule is incredibly busy, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say tonight. So with that, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you and we can see your slides. So we're all good
Excellent.
to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the invitation, the ANJEC team, and everything that you all do for us environmental commission members. It's really an awesome support that you provide us. And I'm just really excited to be here tonight to talk a little bit about my perspective as an oceanographer in New Jersey on offshore wind energy and our ocean planet. As Jennifer mentioned, I'm a faculty member at Rutgers University, and my background is in physical oceanography, which essentially means I'm interested in what makes the ocean move, how it moves, why it moves so often. And in particular, a lot of my research centers on how the moving ocean and the features in the ocean can help us understand better why fish are where they are or marine mammals are where they are. So that dynamic, we call it dynamic habitat. So just trying to understand how the ocean moves. And I'm going to introduce you tonight towards the end, giving some examples of the research that we're doing to the robot that you see there on the screen. Those are our gliders. As mentioned, I'm part of a large group at Rutgers called the Center for Ocean Observing Leadership. We call ourselves Are You Cool? And we have about 45 people in our group, from faculty, a really great team of technical staff that keep everything running, and then really great and inspiring students at both the undergrad and grad level that are helping us on our projects and participating in the research and the outreach. So first, to set the stage a little bit, one of the things that we often think as a perspective is what are global challenges being residents of this wonderful planet that we live on, and that is really to provide food, water, energy, and economic security for a rapidly growing population across the globe, right? And so as we think about our role at Rutgers, it's how can we ensure that we're using the latest science, we're using the latest technologies to support decision-making and policies that help us meet that global challenge. And there's a couple of perspectives that I want to share on the international level. At the UN, we are currently operating under what's being called the Sustainable Development Goals. These are very lofty goals. There's 17 of them. They work towards cleaning our environment. They work towards ensuring we don't have rampant poverty around the world. Really, really lofty goals that the international community is thinking locally on how they can implement and get there. As part of those sustainable development goals that are outlined by the UN, we are currently, I can't believe it, almost halfway through and Ocean Decade. So this is an activity under the United Nations. It's called, as you can see it there on the lower left, the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So this is thinking about those development goals. Now, if you can read really well, and I can't read all the fine print on this slide, but number 14 with the fish, I don't know, can people see my cursor if I do this?
Yes, we can.
Oh, excellent. So right here is a fish. That's the ocean, right? So that's the sustainable development goal related to the ocean. But we all know that we live on an ocean planet, right? 71% of the surface of this planet is ocean. And so the ocean is involved in all other 16 goals. And in recognition of that, established this decade from 2021 to 2030, a decade focused on ocean science. And this is an opportunity for the international community to think about ways to work together on large scale efforts, as well as locally on more individual efforts to support the science that we need for the ocean that we want. And so it's supported by rapid advances in the ways in which we can collect ocean data. It's allowing us to better predict the ocean and analyze it. And through that enhanced data collection, prediction, and analysis, the intent is for that to support decision making. And it's realized, as I've mentioned, through these advanced scientific understanding, emerging technologies, which I will introduce you to in this presentation a little later. Sustaining observations. The ocean is 71% of our surface. It's also very voluminous. It's really deep in places. So how do we get observations in this really challenging place to measure? And many of the ways in which we can support obtaining this challenge is by improving our forecasts. Whether it's a forecast of what the ocean's going to do tomorrow so that Coast Guard search and rescue can effectively search for someone at risk offshore, or trying to improve our predictions of what the ocean might look like in 2050 or 2080 or even further out into the future. So what does this mean for New Jersey? Well, as we bring our focus back into New Jersey, this is a plot that was provided by our state climatologist, Dr. David Robinson. And what he's done here is it's a time series. So you can see on the left of this plot is 1895, a few years ago. On the right of this plot is 2020. And going from the top of the plot down to the bottom is month of year. And what's shown here is for, if you look at the top row, this is January. What's shown is when, between 1895 and 2020, the 5 coldest months happened and the 5 warmest months happened in red. And the darker the color, the further it is to the extreme. So the coldest month in January on record happened here at about, what, 1919? And the warmest for January happened in the 1930s. And so as you go down the rows, you're going into different months of the year. And as you go from left to right, you're getting to more recent time. And what you may notice is if we look at this large scale and across all months, the plot tends to be more blue on the left and more red on the right, indicating that most of our warmest 5 months on record are occurring since 2000. And most of the cold months are happening before 1920 or 1930. And so we can see that there are these trends towards warmer temperatures. This has an effect on a lot of different parts of the system. And recognizing that, there's an interest in policy and decision making to try and think about how we might curb some of these climate effects. And one of those places where that's been discussed is in energy. And so let's look at where we get our energy. So what I'm showing here is a map. You can see New Jersey here in the upper right of the shaded area here. This is the region of the grid that New Jersey shares with neighboring states. The operator of this grid is called PJM because the grid originally was Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Maryland. And so that's where the PJM comes from. But this gives you a sense of where the distribution of power that powers our electric grid for New Jersey and the other states. And so what you can see on the right is the distribution of sources of fuel that provide us our electricity across this entire grid. And what you can see is that a majority of the power is provided by natural gas, and the orange here is nuclear. So most of the energy provided to our electric grid is being sourced by natural gas and nuclear fuels. There is a 13% in coal. And then when we think about renewables, again, trying to minimize the release of fossil fuels into the environment in an attempt to curb the effects of climate. We see a smaller wedge in addition to the nuclear that are meeting that requirement. And if we look at just those renewables, here you can see solar and wind called out, and then there's other. If we zoom in just on that, you can see that majority of our renewable energy source outside of nuclear in terms of clean is 4% of the total for wind and 3% of the total for solar. And then there's also hydropower, which is a smaller percentage, and then other. Should be noted that wind here is not offshore wind. So this is the energy that's being provided by onshore wind. And onshore wind, meaning over land, has been an active energy source in parts of the US for well over 20 years. So this is not a new technology for the US. When we think of the offshore wind space, which I'll bring up in just a minute, that is quite new for the United States. So what about New Jersey? This is looking at it a little differently, and this is focused just on the state of New Jersey within that larger regional grid. And so what I'm showing here is a time series again from 1990 to 2020. And the colors represent the different sources of power that fuel our electric grid. And so what you can see over time is that we're seeing a larger percentage of natural gas. We're seeing a slight reduction in nuclear and a reduction in coal and petroleum for the state of New Jersey. And we start to see an increase in renewables. Governor Murphy has set a goal for offshore wind of 11,000 megawatts. And if I were to put that on this plot, that is what it would be. So if we meet that 11 gigawatt or 11,000 megawatts of power coming from offshore wind, that's the approximate portion of electric demand for the state of New Jersey that would be provided by offshore wind if that goal were met. So just to give you some perspective, it's a significant change in the way in which we generate electricity for our state. So what is offshore wind? Offshore wind is when we construct turbines offshore in the ocean environment to harness energy from the winds that blow over the ocean surface. Because it's out in the ocean, the turbines are larger than what we see on land. And that's primarily because we're not restricted by the size of trucks and roads to move parts of the equipment. Vessels can be much larger than a truck that has to go down a highway. And so you tend to see the turbines larger offshore than you do onshore. Right now, there are 3 different wind farm facilities that are operating in the US offshore. These are the only 3. So right now we have 19 turbines spinning off the coast of the US. 5 of those are in Block Island, Rhode Island. They're just offshore. They're about 2.8 miles off the coast of Block Island. And there's 5 turbines that are providing 30 megawatts of wind energy. And those turbines are pictured in the lower right there. Those turbines are powering the entire island of Block Island, and from what I understand, sending some power back to the mainland. Off coastal Virginia, there's two turbines that are spinning off the coast of Norfolk and Virginia Beach, providing 12 megawatts. Those turbines were installed a couple years ago as a test facility for a larger utility scale wind farm that coastal Virginia will be installing beginning this year. And then finally, the first utility scale wind farm is called South Fork Wind. It's off the coast of Block Island and Martha's Vineyard, and it's providing energy to Long Island. There are 12 turbines providing about 132 megawatts of power. And so what we're seeing now is that some of these utility scale wind farms are being constructed. There's a project called Vineyard Wind 1 off the south coast of Martha's Vineyard that should be completed this year, and that will be larger than any of these three. It'll be about 80 turbines in that facility. So offshore development faces some advantages, but also some challenges that land-based wind power doesn't have to worry about. One is the ocean moves, and the animals within it move with it. And so how do you make decisions and plan for the fact that these static systems for 20 to 30 years will be built within an environment that's constantly moving? As well as there are multiple ocean uses, including military uses, marine trade and commerce, commercial and recreational fishing, and just recreation in general are among some of the big users of the ocean. So how do you ensure that you can try and minimize impacts on some of those other ocean users when you develop offshore wind? So why offshore wind? And why off the coast of New Jersey and the Northeast? One of the reasons is there's a couple people that live here, right? So we have a large population density in the Northeast along what's affectionately known as the Northeast Corridor from Boston to Washington, D.C. There's a lot of people that live in this area just on the coast. And those people require energy, right? So this is actually an image of the United States taken at night from space. And so you can see the brighter spots here are lights. So you can see the different city centers across the US, and it's somewhat of an indicator of where the population is. And so you can see in the Northeast, right near the ocean coast, there is that demand for energy and power. Another reason why offshore wind and not onshore wind in this area is because the wind, what we call the wind resource, is significantly stronger off the coast than on the coast. And so what this was produced by the National Renewable Energy Lab. It's a research center affiliated with the Department of Energy. And what they've done is they've assessed what the mean annual wind speed is across the US and just offshore. And so the colors here indicate winds on average over the year. So purples and blues are where you tend to get less wind, and reds and oranges are where you tend to get more wind. And so you can see the winds of the plains in the center part of the state. And then as you go off the coast, and if you focus in on the Northeast, you can see that on land, we're in that blue area, but offshore, it quickly increases. And so there is a source of wind that could provide reliable power through an offshore wind facility to this large population. And so this is one of the reasons, several of the reasons why this area is seeing the first development of utility scale offshore wind in the United States. And I should mention, although I won't talk much about the details, but offshore wind is not new to the world. So offshore wind has been used for over 20 years in Europe and Asia and other parts of the world. And so there's quite a lot of experience working in the offshore environment with these kinds of facilities. And also, I should say, right, the United States has an extensive experience of working offshore in the oil and gas sector as well. And so there are supply chain, operators, support companies for these kinds of activities that already exist in the US as well. So what are some of the places and the numbers? This map, and I apologize it's so small, but this is to show where offshore wind development is currently being considered around the United States. You can see based on the number of black circles, these are all different leases or projects that are slated for offshore wind development potentially. And you can see that there's quite a density in the Northeast, particularly south of Martha's Vineyard and in what we call the New York Bight, which is between Cape May and the eastern end of Long Island off the coast of New Jersey. But there are other areas being considered throughout the mid-Atlantic, as well as the South Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, the West Coast, and you can see some off of Hawaii. The federal goal for offshore wind is 30 gigawatts by 2030. Remember, I mentioned that the New Jersey goal is 11 gigawatts, so you can give some perspective. And the states are actually more aggressive than the federal government. If you sum up all the goals as of 2 years ago when I sourced this, the state goals are looking for about more than twice the federal goal of 74 gigawatts of offshore wind power. The estimates from this offshore wind report provided by the Department of Energy estimates that it'll trigger more than 12 billion per year in capital investment and create tens of thousands of jobs by 2030. So how does this work? I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on how the renewable energy leasing process works, but I will say that it's governed by the federal agency called BOEM, which is the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And they have a legislative process that goes from identifying potential places that could be developed for future offshore wind projects. And there are multiple public opportunities to participate. There are requirements under NEPA, the Environmental Protection Act, and other legislation like Endangered Species Act, Coastal Zone Management Act, and a lot of legislation that has to pass review even at the siting stage. Once the site is deemed eligible for lease, there is actually an auction that is run by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and companies bid to get access to the leases. They then earn the lease, and then there's a whole nother set of processes that go through site assessment, surveys. They put together what's called a COP, which is a construction and operation plan that, again, is subject to all the different legislation and review, also opportunities for public comment. And then finally, at the end on the right, you get to construction and installation. This process from left to right takes, on average, I think about 10 years to get through. So it's a lengthy process that's subject to quite a bit of review as it goes through different stages of development. For New Jersey, and give a status of the projects in New Jersey. So New Jersey, as I mentioned, has set a target of 11 gigawatts or 11,000 megawatts. That's the number you see down there. In order to get to that number, they have a set of solicitations. So these are opportunities for companies that own the rights to a lease near New Jersey to provide a proposal of what power they can provide to the ratepayers of New Jersey. And there are many requirements that the state of New Jersey puts in those solicitations that the companies must meet and propose. And there are many different criteria that are used to evaluate different projects. This whole process is administered in New Jersey by the Board of Public Utilities. And so to date, there have been 3 solicitations completed You can see the color shaded gray for those. The first one was 1,100 megawatts that was awarded, you can see it from this column, in the second quarter of 2019. That project was Ørsted's Ocean Wind 1, which you may have heard in the fall of 2023. That project, Ørsted decided not to go through with that project. And so this first solicitation, this 1,100 megawatts, is no longer in the stages of development towards meeting this goal of operating in the 2024 to 2025 window. The second solicitation was awarded in 2021. It was actually to two different projects, one by Ørsted and one by another company, Atlantic Shores. As with number one, Ørsted is not doing that project either. But the project that is moving forward is the Atlantic Shores project. This is a link. They have a construction and operations plan. This is the location of that project. It's the blue area that's shaded here within their lease off the coast of Atlantic City. This project is 1,500 megawatts or 1.5 gigawatts of power. And it is moving through the approval process and the timeline for construction. And they're targeting completed construction somewhere around 2029. A third solicitation was just completed in January of 2024. There were two projects that were approved. They're located here. The first one is by Attentive Energy. It's called Attentive Energy 2, and it's located further offshore. This, for perspective, this is where the Atlantic Shores project is that I showed earlier. This is where the Attentive Energy project will be located, again, providing 1.3 gigawatts of power. The second project that was awarded is by Leading Light Wind. It's the name of the project. Invenergy Wind Offshore is the company, and that is the largest project that New Jersey has approved, and that is 2.4 gigawatts of power. Both of those projects are slated to be completed with construction around 2031 or 2032. And I'll just mention briefly, the fourth solicitation is open right now, meaning that New Jersey BPU has published their requirements for companies to bid into the fourth solicitation. And those projects will be submitted by the deadline, will need to be submitted by the deadline in July. And the intent is for by the end of the calendar year for those, the outcome of that solicitation to be announced. And following that, there's three more you can see, 5, 6, and 7, and you can see the approximate times. They're spread roughly 2 years apart going forward. So now on to the research and what Rutgers is doing. I can't share in this time frame all of the research that's underway. And what I will say is that there is an active group of faculty that are working on many aspects of offshore wind, trying to provide the latest science and innovation to the public and to the decision makers and the policy makers that are making decisions on offshore wind. And we have a group called the Offshore Wind Collaborative, which brings together faculty from Rutgers New Brunswick, Rutgers Newark, and Rutgers Camden. And to date, we have over 70 faculty that are participating in that. And they're looking at everything from the economics, the policies and the systems, looking at electric markets, New Jersey economics, supply chain considerations, the engineering aspects here in purple, thinking about advanced materials, how energy can be stored, thinking about integration with the grid. The piece that I'll talk about, which is where my expertise lies, is in the environmental and resource assessment piece. Also, with our land grant mission, we're connected with communities throughout the state. So thinking about how we can engage stakeholders in the research that we're doing, to make sure that we're addressing questions that are being raised by different communities around the state. And also not just our direct role with workforce development and the students that are enrolled at Rutgers and participating in the research that we do, but also the work that we're doing with our community colleges, our middle school, elementary school, and high schools to provide teachers with the information that they need and the answers to the questions that they have. So I'll talk and give an example of what we're doing on the environmental side. That's focused a lot on looking at potential impacts to wildlife, the ocean and habitat itself. We are participating on regional coordination efforts with this. There are two groups, and I know this is recorded, so I purposely put links. Invite you to go to RWSC, which is the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative for Offshore Wind. It's a mouthful, but they're thinking and coordinating research efforts that are looking at wildlife, including marine mammals, birds, bats, sea turtles, among others. And then ROSA, which is the Responsible Offshore Science Alliance, which is an organization of commercial and recreational fishers, offshore wind developers, and scientists to think about how we can frame research questions that are linked to commercial and recreational fishing and the communities that rely on those ocean uses. So for us, the work that I do, I mentioned that the ocean moves, and that's what I study. If we think about offshore wind, we think about the fact that these turbines are going into an environment that's dynamic. And that dynamic environment drives an ecology, whether it's fish, whales, phytoplankton, whatever component of that ecology is quite dynamic along with it. And so what we want to do is we want to address questions and research that try and help decision makers and activities in the ocean account for and understand what those motions are, what they mean, and what impacts may or may not occur. So the tool that we use is our underwater robot. We call it an underwater glider. This is about how big it is. That's a normal sized person there in scuba gear. And what this does, and the reason why we call it a glider, is it literally goes up and down through the ocean and it glides. So it makes itself heavy at the surface by pulling in some seawater and it sinks down towards the bottom. When it gets to the bottom, it pushes that seawater out and rises back up towards the surface. And so it just repeats this and goes up and down. And all the way, it's collecting data. And every once in a while, it gets all the way to the surface, makes a phone call to us back on campus and sends the data back, and then goes again along on its way. So we're using these in a lot of different ways. The state of New Jersey and the state of New York are funding missions for us to get the gliders out. You can see all of these squiggly lines are different missions in which we sent our robots offshore to make important measurements. And these robots are out for a month at a time. They're collecting data the entire time they're out there. And you can see we've done about 81 missions. We've collected about 1,700 days worth of data over that time, and a tremendous amount of what I call water column profiles, which is really a measurement from surface to bottom. And we've done that over 427,000 times. Each of these gliders has some collection of the data that's listed here on the left. So we're measuring things like water temperature, water salinity. We're measuring some chemical parameters like pH, how acidic is the ocean or how basic is the ocean, dissolved oxygen. At the base of the food web, we're measuring how much phytoplankton is out there. Jennifer mentioned at the start that the ocean provides every other breath. Well, that's sourced by phytoplankton. These are floating plants in the ocean that are providing us that oxygen. We can also go up through the food web and look at fish, zooplankton, marine mammals. And so there's an opportunity with these gliders to look at the connections between where animals are and what the ocean is like in that spot. And we can track that in time as all these things move. So it's an incredibly powerful tool. This gives you an example, and I realize this is a busy slide, but it's showing the different months of last year, the seasons going from spring on the left to summer, early fall, and late fall. And so you can see the track that our glider took off the coast of New Jersey in each of these seasons. And then below, this is temperature. So the purple color is cold and the yellow colors are warm, right? And so we can see how the ocean changes from spring to summer. We can see how warm it gets, but look, it still stays cold down there. Um, and then it starts to get cold again in the late fall. So we can measure these things. This is where the chlorophyll are. These are where the plants are. So we can see the plants really start growing in the summer when there's plenty of sunlight, and then a little less plant life in the winter. So this is an example of where not only can we see how things change across the seasons, but we can see some events, like when a hurricane comes by. What effect does a hurricane have on the ocean? Well, the glider doesn't get seasick, so the glider can tell us what's going on during a hurricane. We can look at events like the commercial and recreational fishers were telling us there were some reported fish kills last summer. Well, we had a glider out there that was looking at dissolved oxygen. And in these areas that are colored warmer colors, the oranges and the reds, this is an area where the oxygen was really low. And fortunately, Hurricane Lee came through right around here. Fortunately for the fish, I shouldn't say fortunately a hurricane came. That's not what I'm saying. But what it did is it refreshed the oxygen supply for our fish. And again, the gliders were able to track that over time. So where are our gliders right now? This is the advantage. As I'm talking to you tonight, we have 4 gliders off the coast of New Jersey that are making these important measurements. One glider here, supported by funds from the state of New York, looking at ocean conditions and marine mammals. 2 gliders here, supported by state of New Jersey, again, focusing on some of the data that I showed earlier. And a 3rd glider here, also from the state of New Jersey, that's monitoring the waters just off the beach from the northern parts of the state to the southern. And this is an example of what they provide us. So here you see the same track for these 2 gliders here. And this is where they hear certain species of whales. So this is right whale. There was a possible detection of a right whale right here. That happened on May 10th. And these are humpback whales. So you can see how many humpback whales are offshore. And each one of those red dots is a confirmed detection of a humpback whale. And what we're able to do on the science side is relate these detections of where we see these animals and what the ocean conditions were like at that time. Look how awesome and complex the ocean is. You can see all the different layers and patterns. This is just temperature. So the purples here are about 43 degrees, and the yellows up near the surface are 56 degrees. And so we can start to see the ocean where the animals are and try and understand a little better how those animals are moving through this ocean environment. So in summary, offshore wind is currently operating off the U.S. East Coast, and it is coming to New Jersey within the next 5 years. The ocean is a very complex place, and all stakeholders can contribute their expertise to the responsible deployment of offshore wind. And that's our responsibility, in my opinion, as a scientist and innovator within the state. I've grown up in New Jersey, and I want to make sure that that science is getting to the decision makers. And research at Rutgers are very active in this space and are helping to better inform the process, making sure that we're providing relevant science to inform the most responsible implementation. And I will finish with my contact information there and turn it over to you, Jennifer, if there are any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Josh. I really appreciate that. You kind of have my dream job, being an oceanographer or a marine scientist. So uh, that's what I wanted to do growing up. My asthmatic lungs had held me back from getting to scuba, but I love what I do now. So hopefully we're making good policy that helps the research move along, and we're all working together to protect our environment. So I also want to give a shout out. We don't have them here with us tonight, but there's an enormous amount of research being done in New Jersey regarding our ocean. So Rutgers is most certainly a leader. We also have Monmouth University at the Urban Coast Institute. We have Stockton University, go Ospreys. I graduated when it was still Stockton College down there, doing a lot of research. There's more tech research being done out at NJIT, so go Highlanders. That's also where I went. And so I know these universities are coordinating with one another, and there are probably some I left out. That's the risk of naming some of them, but know that there's an enormous amount of research happening in New Jersey, also in New York. So we are learning so much about our ocean and how to make these projects even better. So we do have two questions. If you've got questions that you want to ask of Josh, please use the Q&A option. So the first one, this might be more for me, Josh. I don't know that you want to weigh in here, but let me know. What are your thoughts on the lawsuits being brought against the proposed wind farms in New Jersey? Um, I will take a stab at that and say that a number of the groups, I don't know all the lawsuits, but I'm familiar with a few of them. A number of the groups um, we know have been associated with a fossil fuel advocacy organization. And so I think that there are some really good hearted, well intentioned, well meaning people who have concerns. And I think, they're doing what they believe is right, but there's also input and organization of the fossil fuel industry who's kicking back hard in some ways against renewable energy. And so I think it's an unfortunate delay in some of these projects, and hopefully it won't delay them too long because it's going to take time to site these projects, build these projects. This isn't something that is happening this year, which leads into, I don't know, Josh, if you wanted to say anything with that or just kind of
Yeah,
leave.
no, I leave to your expertise there. The only thing I will say is that if there's a need for data or science in any of that, our responsibility is to be available and there for that. So
Right.
I am not familiar with any of those lawsuits in any great detail. We haven't been asked, nor I don't think we would be. But just to say that I just want to make sure that we take our responsibility as objective scientists in this to make sure that we're available and accessible if people have questions about any of the science, if that's relevant to any of those cases. But yeah, I
Yeah,
try to
thank
stay
you.
out of the lawsuits as much as possible.
I try to stay out of lawsuits too. So we have another question. What's the cost per kilowatt hour that companies are charging for electricity to bring it onshore? And what approximately is the added distribution cost? How does this compare to today's electricity cost? I will note for New Jersey, where we are, is that Atlantic Shores is expected to be the first project to bring offshore wind energy into the grid in New Jersey. And that is not expected to happen until about 2028 is the earliest estimate. So we're a few years off at this point. There's a lot of permitting that has to be done, a lot of construction that needs to be done. There are training centers that have been and will continue to be developed so that people have the skill set to be able to not only build these turbines, but to service them and operate them appropriately. So I do know that New Jersey's ratepayer advocate has been active in advocating for making sure that the cost of wind energy is low and as low as it can be. The benefit with offshore wind energy is that once the facilities are built, this is my understanding. Once the facilities are built, the operating cost goes down because it's not like oil and gas. You don't have to keep drilling for oil and gas to then provide input into the system. The wind happens and the wind is free. So once you have the turbines built, of course, there's maintenance and you need to make sure that they're operating at peak whenever the wind is blowing. So, there are maintenance costs, but the cost should go down for energy. And so I know New Jersey's ratepayer advocate is really tuned into that. So it's an ongoing issue, and I can't answer that very specifically right now because it hasn't happened yet for New Jersey. Josh, I don't know if there's anything else there.
Yeah, no, I there we have economists that are looking into that. That's not my area of expertise, so I think you described it quite well. The one thing I'll say is that the BPU does post publicly aspects of those plans that help provide the details of what each of these projects have committed in terms of cost.
Yeah.
So it is available.
Thank you. And you had a slide that addressed the next question early in your presentation. I can't remember exactly what they were, so maybe you can refresh. What states are currently running offshore wind turbines? So I know we've got Rhode Island. That's the one I'm most familiar with. And there are two more, right?
So right now, go back to that slide. Right now, there's three facilities that are operating. So one is Rhode Island. That's been operating since around 2017, 2018, I think. Um, the coastal Virginia, that's off the coast of Norfolk, so just south of Chesapeake Bay mouth. And then the South Fork Wind, the lease area itself is, let me go to the map. Um, I had a better map. Oh, I guess I don't have it. It's off of Block Island. It's but further offshore. It's in federal waters. Um, so that it's providing energy to Long Island. It's actually the interconnect is on the eastern end of Long Island, but the lease area itself is off of Block Island.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I appreciate it. Next question is, what is being done to counter the negative publicity that claims that wind turbines kill whales and other fish? That's a great question. And so ANJAC is part of a coalition called New Jersey Wind Works and several other coalitions as well. And we have been out in front with science-based information for, I would say, the better part of two, maybe we're going on 2.5 years at this point in time. ANJAC publishes articles. I'll speak just for ANJAC. There are many organizations that are part of that coalition, but I don't want to speak for them. We publish articles in our ANJAC report, and we ask experts like Josh to author them so that we can get that out to our constituents. We have held in 2022 and 2023 a comprehensive climate and renewable energy mini series. We have highlighted wind energy and solar energy because we're fans of both of them, making sure that they're cited appropriately at our environmental congress. And so those links are on YouTube for Environmental Congress and our mini series. We bring experts like Josh to you here to explain what's being done. We have had rallies, we have had op-eds. So we really are pushing back. As I said, there are some groups that we know are associated with or have been associated with the fossil fuel industry. And wow, do they have, the fossil fuel industry has a lot more money than somebody like ANJAC. But we are doing our very best with our colleague organizations through New Jersey Windworks. So if you don't follow them, you can go and check out that website and follow their social media channels. Josh, is there anything you want to share from Rutgers' perspective there?
Yeah, so the I mentioned the website, the Offshore Wind Collaborative. We put up a Q&A website about the connections of that were being reported on wind and whales, and so we reference the scientific literature. So one of the things that we're bound to is what's gone through the rigor of peer review, right? The peer review is a pretty extensive process, and so things we report there are subject to that peer review, and it's much more reliable information that's been verified. And so that website goes through some of the questions that were being raised and some of the sources and resources that we have. So again, we want to be accessible, and we put that information out so that people could identify those resources.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question, I'm certain I know the answer to this one, but I'll let you take the first answer here. Can you put in perspective whether climate change or offshore wind power is a bigger threat to whales?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's one of the key things for the data that we're collecting, right? So one of the we've seen a lot of observations of changing distributions of not just marine mammals, but also fish and zooplankton that they prey upon. That's leading to large shifts in where these animals are in the ocean. We're seeing changes in when like ocean spring and ocean fall occur, which is really important to certain aspects of life history. So the climate and even the interannual and episodic event scale variability is significant. And so one of the reasons why we're collecting this data is so that we can get the context of those things when we start looking at, you know, we'll see when wind farms are up, what's that impact, and we can put it in the proper context. Um, I I don't have the data right now to say, oh, it's definitely X times bigger, but I can say we have seen a lot of evidence and have the data to show the significant impacts of climate change on the distribution of animals. And the experience in Europe with those facilities and what we expect off the US are not as high as what we see for climate effects. But
Yeah,
the
I will
I don't
add.
have the data to say that definitively, but that's certainly what we want to get.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I am blanking on her last name, Dr. Heidi. Oh, somebody help me. She's with Pinelands Preservation Alliance. Just provided a. She is also has her PhD in oceanography, and she provided
It's
a
Yay, Heidi
really
Yay,
great. What's that?
Heidi Yay.
Yes, Heidi Yeh. Thank you. She just provided a webinar for New Jersey Windworks. So again, you can go to that website and check it out. That touched on this issue. And Anjak has also had a previous webinar that would be on our YouTube channel where we had researchers from BOEM and others come in to talk specifically about whales and sound. And so these are researchers who have spent their academic career and their professional career studying the ears of baleen and toothed whales. And so they are, the physiological structures of baleen and toothed whales are different. They parted one another in the evolutionary chain, but there is a lot that we do know in terms of the range of sound that they can hear. And there are mitigation efforts that are done during research and construction. So, for example, there's always a special species observer on boats, ships, I should say, when there is ocean mapping being done. So, if a whale is in the area, the boat shuts down. Go get a cup of coffee. We're not doing the testing right now. There is always a ramping up. So, we start it quietly and ramp up the sound so the whales can get out of the way. It's not a blast that comes out of nowhere at them. During construction, we're learning from humpback whales. So part of how they hunt down in, I told you I was an ocean nerd, down in Australia and New Zealand is there are a tribe of humpbacks that use bubble nets. And so they are usually two females that will hunt together and they blow air out of their blowhole and create a net to trap fish. So we are learning from them, and there's bubble net technology and sometimes a double bubble net that will be used during construction to help isolate the sound from anything that's outside of that bubble net. In terms of climate change, what Josh had said, and I promise we'll wrap this up shortly after 8. I won't talk forever. What we saw, um, not last winter, but the winter before that, is that the menhaden or bunker, same fish, depends on what you're using it for, you call it different things. So menhaden or bunker were hanging out off the New York Bight. So think, northern New Jersey, New York Bight area. And humpbacks eat menhaden. And the busiest port in the country right now is the port of New York and New Jersey. So you now have ships coming in right through the menhaden and bunker population because the winter was warm and they didn't see the need to migrate. So the humpbacks hung out as well. So that was a collision course of humpback whales who were feeding on menhaden and were right in the way of these giant shipping boats. Think about the size of the one that just knocked down the bridge in the Baltimore Harbor. Uh, and so it was a tragedy, and that's climate change because the Gulf Stream is starting to collapse. We're seeing the effects on the ocean, and it is wildly changing the migration patterns. So that's probably more than you wanted to know, but
Well, and one thing I'll say, Jennifer, too, is that um, it's actually interesting that the humpback whale population is recovering,
yeah,
and there are many more in the population than they were 20, 30 years ago. Some of you who have been in the area for a while I know growing up in Monmouth County, I never saw humpback whales in Raritan Bay, right? And now they're coming in, right? And so that's an indication of some of the changes that we're seeing out there. And there's more out there. And the other thing I'll say, and you mentioned it, Jennifer, but not all surveys are the same. And I think some of that has been misreported in the media. And it's really important because the sound emanating from different surveys are quite different. And we know a lot about how those different types of surveys impact based on the physiology of the different animals. And so Jennifer mentioned that, and we report some of that on our website to try and clear up some of the confusion in what's been reported there.
Really appreciate that. Military sonar is very different than oil and gas sonar, is very different than mapping ocean floor for wind use sonar. They are very different from one another. We've got a few more questions. We'll try to answer these in rapid style. Do you think there's enough data known to date to properly site the turbines since the ocean and wildlife are moving? I'll just add real quick and then turn it over to you, Josh. So yes, we of course animals move. ANJAC has been involved for more than 10 years now at this point in an initiative with others to make sure that we chose places that were smart, that had the least impact for these offshore wind turbine arrays. And we did that by having community meetings for what were called the Marco maps. And you can look that up, MARCO. I don't know if we can get a link in the chat. So sorry, I'm catching you off guard here on that. But the idea here was let's avoid the IT cables that are out there, because boy, are there a lot of IT cables. Let's try to avoid the shipping lanes. Let's try to avoid the shellfish beds. Let's try to avoid the migration routes, and then choose where we would put these wind arrays. And so that work was done more than 10 years ago. Of course, it's continuing and it'll be updated because nothing in the environment is static. But there's an awful lot of research and input that's been done on this. So Josh, I'll turn it over to you on that question.
Yeah, and it's a challenge, right? Because I mentioned there's multiple uses, and I talked. Oh well, it's right on this slide, right? That there are one of the multiple ocean uses is finding the place and recognizing that things move. And so the data that's being used to support those decisions from the oceanographic side goes back to the 1930s, right? We actually have been studying the ocean off the coast of New Jersey in a scientific way for almost 100 years. And so there's quite a bit of data, and we can, because of some of those lengthy time series, we can get some estimates on sort of on scales appropriate for planning and decision making, how things are moving. And so I can only say that they're never, in my opinion, this is Josh speaking, you're not going to find a place that's without conflict because everyone uses many parts of the ocean. But BOEM, through its process and the public engagement piece, there are opportunities for them to take the latest data that's available and try and identify the best places, and then work once that's selected to figure out how we can use science and innovation and decision making to minimize impacts in those places that have been identified.
Great, thanks. I think we've got three more questions. I'm going to combine the next two here because I think they're getting at the same question. What effect does the development and research have on marine mammals and biomass fisheries?
So the research that we're doing is to try and, in the way I term it, is isolate the impact of offshore wind from all the other things that influence fisheries and marine mammals in our ocean. I was part of a National Academies panel last year, and one of the things that we recognize is there are many things outside of offshore wind that influence fish, fisheries, marine mammals, and we need to be able to isolate once an offshore wind farm is in, what effect that ocean wind farm has to all these other things. And we know a lot about all the other things. And so the data that we're collecting is going to give us the ability to properly assess an impact of a project like this on the environment when we consider all the other things that affect that environment.
Great, thank you. The next question is what type of maintenance is required on the turbines, daily, weekly, what's the oil consumption? I don't know if we can answer that. I will say that there is, how can I term this? A bad rumor that goes around that says these turbines use fossil fuels to run. That's not true. There is an element of a lubricant that is needed to keep the turbine moving, and that's largely a one-time input. And so when you look at the amount of oil that is needed for these turbines compared to I always forget the number, but it's on some order of 14 billion barrels a week, might be daily, that we use globally of oil and gas. The numbers are minuscule. So yes, there is a lubricant to keep the turbines, but the efficiency is incredible of these turbines. I don't know if you want to share anything in terms of maintenance on them.
The one thing I'll say is we have faculty at Rutgers in the industrial and civil engineering department that are running simulations of what a maintenance schedule might look like for a wind farm given actual meteorological and ocean conditions. So we provide them with the ocean and atmosphere conditions, and then they can look at what anticipated fatigue might be based on materials that are being used to get at a maintenance schedule. And we're also working with some companies. There's a lot of innovative companies out there that are even looking at electrifying vessels so that there's no additional fossil fuel burning when you actually transport people out to maintain a wind farm facility. And so there's a lot of innovation going there, but our engineering faculty are working on those questions so that you can assess and the companies can assess too what their maintenance schedule might be. And I will say also, there's a lot of, this is not new to the world, right? So some of these companies have been maintaining offshore wind facilities in other parts of the world and have a good sense of what that is. I just don't know it off the top of my head, but that research is underway and that understanding is known.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And the last question for the evening is what's the average distance of turbines from the shoreline? I don't have an average for you, but I can tell you the minimum of the projects right now is just shy of 10 miles. And ANJAC worked with New Jersey Audubon, the state of New Jersey, and others in supporting that these turbines are constructed outside of the Atlantic fly zone. So the Atlantic flyway is the migration for birds. And yes, we have deep pelagic birds, but there are very few in between. So most of them need to land at some point. So if you get outside of the Atlantic flyway, then you are minimizing bird impact. Others are so far out that you are never, ever, ever going to see them, likely unless you've got an amazing telescope. So Josh, yeah.
Yeah, the Atlantic Shores project is located here. And so that's what Jennifer said. That's the ones that are going to be closest to the coast. And I believe the closest turbine is just under 10 miles from the coast. The two projects that were just awarded in January are significantly further offshore. They're 40 plus miles. Those projects you will not see from shore. Given weather conditions, there are times when you likely will see some of the turbines from the Atlantic Shores site, but it'll be smaller on the horizon, but you could see them.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, with that, I want to thank you so much for being here with us tonight and sharing your research and your knowledge. I really appreciate it. And we also appreciate your service as an EC member in Cranberry Township. So thank you for everything you do there. And thank you to Sheila and Randy for being with us tonight and keeping pace as always while they know I light up when I talk about the ocean and being able to go and find links and post them in the chat so you guys can have additional resources. We will post this on YouTube and we'll send it out to everyone who registered for the event. So we know we'll get more folks that will be looking at this. So thank you. Enjoy your evening. And we're at that time of year where I can say have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend as well, because that's coming up. So thank you,
So
Josh.
much.
Thanks, Sheila. Thanks,
Appreciate the
Randy. Take care.
invitation.
Have a good night.